You know, I can't see myself when I'm doing, there should be a small thing with my,
if you go to the right hand side, there's a, right on the top of the screen, there's a view option.
view?
Yes.
No, I don't see it.
Do you have the participant list and the panelist list open or not? Because it's right outside of that in the black area of the screen on the top right hand side.
I have start participants, question, answer, poll, you share, pause, share, annotate, remote control, and more. That's all I have.
No, it should be at the top of your screen and it'll
Yeah, this
say
is a
view.
No, I don't have view. It's weird. So I can't see myself, and that's a little difficult to talk to people when you can't see yourself. Let me stop the share for a minute and see. Oh, I can see the view here. So if I put speaker view, let me see if I do that, and now I share the screen, whether that will work. Funny enough, I can see you, but not me. See Calvary. Okay, we'll start in here. Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because I can see we are connected from all over. Want to welcome you to this webinar. This is the first in a series of road safety webinars that the SSATP and the African Road Safety Observatory want to conduct over the coming months. So this webinar is going to be focused on the issue of safer and cleaner used vehicles for Africa. A little bit of an introduction. My name is Teriadra Shong. I'm going to be the moderator for this webinar today. I'm a senior transport specialist based in the World Bank, and my role is to focus on issues around road safety within the Africa Transport Policy Program, which is a policy program hosted in the World Bank. And I expect my manager will talk a little bit more about this. So what is the Africa Transport Policy Program? It is a program that has been set up within the World Bank to focus on developing sound transport policies in Africa. We have three main pillars that we focus on: regional integration, urban mobility, and road safety. And the road safety is the pillar that I'm responsible for, and this webinar is under the road safety pillar. We are also doing this webinar in partnership with the African Road Safety Observatory. The African Road Safety Observatory has been set up with partners to promote better road safety data and cooperation across Africa. So what we are planning, what we are hoping to do with this observatory is to foster positive cooperation between countries to improve crash data systems, to raise road safety
améliorer la sécurité routière dans le continent et pour partager des données et des informations. Cela va se faire en améliorant la
how we can network road safety agencies and road safety stakeholders across the continent, and then how we can bring international and the global perspective into the work we're doing in Africa to improve the success stories and procedures for the continent. The quality of the work plan was sort of looking at how we can develop the network, improving the tools and methodologies, creating and updating a common database, and monitoring indicators. And one of the key indicators is the indicators on vehicles, vehicle inspections, the number of vehicles. And so this webinar is a very key part of what we are doing. The road safety partners under ARSO are, we are doing, ARSO is under the leadership of the African Union, but we have financing partners, UKA, Total Foundation, the Global Road Safety Partnership, and SSATP itself is one of the funding partners. And then we have collaborating technical partners who bring the international and technical perspective to improve the quality of the work we're doing under ARSO. And this is the FIA, the International Transport Forum, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, African Development Bank, and the United Nations Commission for Africa. So to put up the agenda, we are going to have the welcoming remarks given by the manager of SSATP. Then we'll have the first presentation from UNEP. Then we'll have the second presentation from the Dutch Institute. Then we'll put up a panel who will give us a discussion on what the two presentations, and then we'll open the floor for some questions and answers. With the questions and answers, we ask that you put your questions in the chat function of the, if you look at the bottom, you should see a chat function feature. You put your questions there, and between myself and my colleague Kaori will monitor the questions and direct them to the panelists and discussants as needed. Finally, there will be some closing remarks from our colleague from the African Union. A few housekeeping issues. This is being recorded, of course, so just to let you know that you are being recorded. And the other issue is also the interpretation function. Again, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you should see a globe.
Écran, vous devez voir un petit globe terrestre qui dit interprétation. Si vous cliquez,
it can show you how to select the language. So when a French speaker is speaking, you need to select English, and when an English speaker is speaking, you need to select French so that you can hear the interpretation. I think those are the key issues that need to be addressed right now. So I think without further ado, I will ask Mustafa, the acting program manager of SSATP, to give his presentation and welcoming remarks. Mustafa, over to you.
Thank you, Taiwa. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to this SSATP and UNEP webinar on safer and cleaner used vehicles for Africa. As Taiwa mentioned earlier, road safety is one of the three key pillars under the SSATP third development program. and will be also a priority area we will pursue in the upcoming fourth development for the next 5 years. As you know, also this year, we have just began the second decade of action for road safety and
décennie pour l'action pour la sécurité routière et 2 objectifs de développement durable.
6 and 11.2 address road safety as well. The World Bank and SSATP and other partners emphasize the safe systems approach, which recognize 6 pillars: safe speed, safe roads, safe people, post-crash care, and today's topic will focus on safe vehicles. As of today, only 2% of the world vehicle fleets in Africa is in sub-Saharan Africa, but Africa bears a disproportionate number of fatalities. It's around 10%. As an example, in DRC, there is nearly 1 fatality per year for every 10 vehicles. A statistic the Safer Roads for Africa report defines as vehicle killing potential, VKP, using the global burden of disease study. We have calculated that of the 30 countries with the highest vehicle killing potential in the world, 28 are in sub-Saharan Africa. Vehicle standard, which is permitted to apply on the roads, makes a difference. Of the 47 African countries covered in the WHO 2008 progress report on road safety, only 1 African country required seat belts, 2 required seat belt anchorages, and 1 had front and side impact minimal standards. Only 2 had requirements for electronic stability control, only 2 required pedestrian protection features, and only 2 countries required child seat anchorage. As African countries' economy grow, the rate of motorization will grow. So how do we put in place measures now that will reverse the trend of these fatalities and serious injuries rates in the future? We need to understand the causes and look to fix them. And one of these causes seems to be the nearly unregulated import of second-hand or used vehicle into many African countries. This webinar is intended to present the result of 2 reports looking into the prevalence of the international second-hand vehicle trade and the way such trade is or isn't regulated. This is a big topic of interest for SSATP and the World Bank because the quality of vehicles coming into and being used in our member countries affects not only road safety, but also air quality and fossil fuel consumption. Collectively, we need to work together to address this challenge of motorization. The bank is preparing right now a report on this. Its title is Motorization Management for Development, an integrated approach to improving vehicles for sustainable mobility, which our colleague Roger Goham, one of our today's discussants, will introduce in more details later on. So thank you for joining our webinar. And I would like to hand over the microphone again to our moderator, Taiwa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. So now quickly, one of the things I didn't do well at the beginning was to, so some of you, when you registered, you didn't get an opportunity to say where you're from or what organization. So I want to just do a quick poll to share, ask you to share where you are from. So if you bear with me, let me just quickly get that up. So the first question up is where you are from. Would ask each of you to say which particular region you are from. Later on at the end of the thing, we will come back to you and get your specific countries, but it will be good to get a sense of where the different participants here are from. And the second question is which sector you work with. Okay, I'll give about 50% now. I'll give about 10 more seconds and we'll. Okay, so I'll be ending the poll in about 10 seconds. We've got about a 60% participation and we'll work with that. Thank you so much for those of you who have voted. Reach 70%. Okay, got 70%, I think that's fine. Let me just end the polling and share with you the results. So as you see, it's actually quite widespread across Africa. 10% from East, 25% from the West, nobody from North Africa, and 20% from East. You have representatives from Europe, Latin America, North America, and South Asia. So that's good to know. And thank you for those who joined in South Asia, because the time must be quite difficult for you. And again, we've got a fairly good representation of where people are coming from. International organizations seem to be the highest, but we do have some NGO representation, some government representation, and public sector representation. So thank you very much for this. It's very good information, and hopefully at the discussion point, we'll have all of you contributing so that we do have that wide range of stakeholder views. Okay, then let me go straight ahead and introduce the first speaker. Jane Akuma is currently the Africa Cleaner Mobility Focal Point at the Sustainable Mobility Unit within the United Nations Environment Programme. She's based in Kenya. She joined UNEP in 2004 and has been working towards environmentally sustainable transport in Africa throughout this time. She's been working mainly on the introduction of cleaner road transportation fuels and matching vehicle emission control technologies and promoting new and emerging transport solutions including soot-free buses and electrical mobility. Prior to joining UNEP, she worked for the government of Kenya, first in the Ministry of Finance and National Planning on international trade issues, and then later on in the Ministry of Energy as the head of petroleum unit. She holds a bachelor degree from the University of Nairobi and a Master's of Art degree in economics from the Carleton University in Canada. Jane, you're most welcome, and it's over to you to have your presentation. You have 15 minutes. We want to try and keep on time. 5 minutes to time, I will remind you that you need to wind up. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Taiwa. Can you please enable me to share my screen?
Can you share now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Hold on. Are you still a co-host? Have I removed the co-host ability from you? Hold on.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, let me start from the beginning.
Just a quick reminder while Jane is starting, we do have interpretation. Please go to the bottom of your screen. You should see a globe which has interpretation on, and then click French for those of you who want the translation from French to English. And when the French speaker is speaking, you click on English to get the English translation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Taiwa. Last year in October, UNEP published a report on the used vehicles and the environment. And the report looked at light-duty vehicles, used light-duty vehicles, where they're coming from, and the regulatory environment in the recipient countries. Sorry, you can see my screen properly. So what we know is that currently today we have about 1 billion light-duty vehicles, slightly over 1 billion light-duty vehicles. And by 2050, this will double to about slightly over 2 billion vehicles. If you look at the projections or the estimation from the International Energy Agency, is that the developed world, the OECD, the vehicle growth has almost peaked. Most of the growth will happen in non-OECD countries, in low and middle income countries. And this also, of course, includes countries like Africa. While what we see is that for the developed countries, a lot of the vehicle growth is actually from new vehicles. So the bulk or a big chunk of the vehicle growth that is going to happen in non-OECD countries will be used vehicles. So the 1 billion vehicles that we'll see, the growth that we are projecting of vehicles, where will they be coming from and what's the quality? And that's what the UNEP report aimed at doing. So from the report, we looked at the 3 major exporting countries, and that's Europe, Japan, and the US. The study looked at between the years 2015 and 2018, we found that about 14 million vehicles were exported by these 3 big exporting countries. And from the data that is reported, this comprises 100% of the vehicles that were exported by the EU, 97% of the vehicles exported by Japan, and 94% of the vehicles exported by the US. So a big portion. So these 3 markets actually constitute the used vehicle market, a big chunk. What we found is that 70% of the used vehicles are actually exported to developing countries. And out of that 70%, 40% of the vehicles are exported to Africa. So, and that's why we dived in a bit more on Africa, because they receive much more used vehicles, than any other region in the world. When we looked at the recipient countries, what are the kind of standards, regulatory standards for, that can govern these used vehicles. We looked at the vehicle emission standards already in countries. And as UNEP, we advocate for a minimum of Euro 4 vehicle emission standards because that's where the health benefits start to accrue from the vehicle technology. Of course, we need to tie that in with low sulfur fuels or with cleaner fuels. But Euro 4 is the minimum, and this Euro 4 was mandatory in Europe from 2005. So already 16 years ago. So this is actually, an old technology. So again, when you look at Africa, and I'll be diving in more on Africa, you see that a lot of the countries do not have any vehicle emission standards. Actually, 46 countries have no vehicle emission standards. And by mid of last year, only 2 countries had vehicle emission standards of Euro 4, which is Morocco and Rwanda. Maybe one of the things that I should mention is that we didn't look in the report on countries that have banned used vehicles import. In Africa, we have 4 countries that have banned import of used vehicles. And maybe what I should say right from the outset is that what we are advocating and what the aim of this report is actually to see how to incentivize cleaner used vehicles, because we see this as a way of improving mobility in our African countries more affordably. But I think it's very, very important to have targeted vehicles or import of these used vehicles. Again, if you look at Morocco at Euro 4, they would be able to import very good vehicles. South Africa, that has banned import of used vehicles, they are at Euro 2. So it doesn't mean that a country that has banned has actually better or cleaner vehicles in terms of the environment. Looking at the regulatory regimes, so we looked at the vehicle emission standards and combined that with the age limit so that we can have an assessment of what are the regulatory regimes in a country. And what we found is that, again, Africa, it's a big problem, and I will be talking more about this. Most of the countries have weak or very weak regulatory environment to import, to incentivize import of cleaner vehicles. Mustafa just talked about vehicle safety. Again, this is what we got from the WHO Global Status Report on Road Safety, a mirror image of the regulatory report. And you can see that, again, most of the African countries lack minimum vehicle safety standards. So diving in more on Africa, what do we see? Used vehicles are important because, for example, we've done several studies with countries to look at the kind of vehicles being imported over time. And for example, in Nigeria, 94% of the vehicles being added into the country actually imported as used. But it's not just in Nigeria. For example, in Tanzania, 97%, Malawi, 97%. Most of Africa, used vehicles are a big chunk of the newly registered vehicles. So it is an important segment that we need to look at. What are the kind of vehicles that are in circulation? Again, I mentioned Euro 4 as the minimum standard that we are looking at. There was a study that was carried out looking at the vehicles. This was in 2013, looking at the vehicles that are in circulation in Accra and the vehicles in circulation, for example, in Sheffield, in the UK. And you'll find that a lot of the vehicles in circulation in Accra were Euro 1. And the majority of vehicles in Sheffield in the UK were Euro 4, Euro 5, and of course the least Euro 3. So this has an implication in terms of emissions, in terms of health, and in terms of the vehicles that we are importing. So if we import cleaner vehicles, we'll also ensure that the vehicles in our system are also cleaner. We found that a lot of the countries prefer an age-based regulation, which is still not adequate. For example, if you look at the example of Uganda on the right, you'll find that Uganda did bring in place They had an 8-year age limit like Kenya, but around 2002, 2003, that was sort of like replaced with what they call an environmental levy, requiring older vehicles more than 8 years to pay an additional taxation. It was, I think, either 25 or 30%. But as you can see from that time, older vehicles actually started coming in. If you look at the graph, by 2017, when we were carrying out this study with the government, some of the trucks, some of the vehicles coming in were over 20 years, close to 30 years, and this is just the average age of the vehicles being imported over time. And actually from this study 2018-19, the government did put in place, they wanted an 8-year rule, but their parliament went for 15-year regulation. So as we saw earlier on, Africa, when you look at the vehicle emissions and the age limit, again, most of the African countries, 40, can be classified as having weak or very weak regulatory regimes. What we also found out is that some countries have incentivized import of cleaner vehicles. For example, Mauritius, they have a 3-year age limit, and they have very good taxation that incentivizes very clean vehicles. In fact, initially, they had what is called a fee-bit, where if you're bringing in an inefficient car, you pay more. If you're bringing in a cleaner car, you pay less tax. And that has, led to people bringing in more and more cleaner, more efficient vehicles. And you can see this from the number of electric cars, hybrid cars being imported. So on the report, these are the key findings. And some of the conclusions or some of the recommendations from the report were that we need more research. And as UNEP, we are currently working on a heavy-duty vehicles report, similar to this light-duty vehicle report. Another recommendation from the report was that there's need for global and regionally harmonized used vehicle standards. Thirdly, that used vehicles can contribute to cleaner, safer, affordable mobility in many countries, including Africa, and the need for gradual progression into more stricter standards. If you look at, for example, today Europe is at Euro 6, they're talking about Euro 7. So it is a gradual process for countries to go implementing cleaner standards. So it is a phased approach. We also talked about it being a shared responsibility, both for exporting countries and for importing countries. And that's why there's a need for maybe a global harmonized approach, but definitely this is difficult. I think what we found from the experience when we're talking about fuels, we found that it's much easier or faster for countries importing to actually put a standard. It's much more difficult for exporting countries to agree to some minimum standard, but that's what we are working on. And then lastly, the need for strong enforcement. So after that, last year, we did apply for partners or 4 agencies, UNEP, the UN Economic Commission for Europe, FIA, and the International Motor Vehicle Inspection Committee. We did apply to the UN Road Safety Trust Fund and got some funding to carry out a project that is called Safer and Cleaner Used Vehicles for Africa. The objective of this is to ensure that only quality used vehicles are imported into Africa with major road safety benefits and also, core benefits to the environment and the economy. It is a 2-year project, last year up to 2022. And what are the specific activities under this project? It is to come up with sort of a minimum requirement or regulation that exporters and importing countries in Africa can agree on for used vehicles. And given that the funding wasn't a lot, what we agreed is that to implement this agreement or minimum standards in 2 sub-regions, in West Africa and East Africa, and then under phase 2, we will be applying to make it continental and also coming up with a label inspection and enforcement, SITA is helping to come up with a framework. And of course, training, information, and communication, FIA is responsible for that. So what has been the progress? UNEP, we have been also throughout, in the past and working with other partners and other programs, we've been collaborating
you
with
have
the ECOWAS.
5 minutes left.
Yes, I'm almost actually, I think
Okay.
it's my second last slide. So UNEP has been collaborating with the ECOWAS Commission and working with the West African countries. And last year in September, the 15 countries of ECOWAS actually adopted minimum Euro 4 vehicle emission standards for the sub-region, effective this year. And they also came up with, so actually these standards are both for light duty and heavy duty vehicles. And they also agreed to some minimum age limit, which was 5 years for light duty vehicles, 10 years for heavy duty vehicles, but countries had a 10-year time frame to implement this age limit. Last year and this year, we've also had several meetings organized by SITA and the UNECE, both on data, how to control data on used vehicles, and also exporters to come up with the minimum regulation. And all this, the outcomes are actually on our website. So the final slide. So what are the next steps, when it comes to used vehicles? I think it's important to consider this as an integrated approach, towards low emission transport or mobility. There's need for cleaner fuels. Already, we have now as a continent, with Algeria having gone unleaded, we need to move to ultra low sulfur fuels, if possible, 10 parts per million fuels. We need to have vehicle emission standards, as you saw, having inspection and maintenance program for in-use vehicles, which ensures that, we put emissions in control. We've also seen that the public transport, the heavy duty vehicles are also very high emitters of both, black carbon and particulate matter. So they need to have in place soot-free buses and, looking also at heavy duty vehicles. Fuel economy, Mustafa talked about the need for, fuel economy vehicles, which consume less and also emit less CO2, so both local and global benefits. I think it's also important for Africa not to be left behind in the shift to electric mobility. We are seeing a lot of secondhand electric vehicles coming in, need for standards. That's quite important, so that we also do not get, electric vehicles where the batteries are almost at the end of life. So that's quite an important thing. And then lastly, the need for non-motorized transport policies, infrastructure, so that, that also, when you're talking about safety, shorter distances, people can walk, cycle, and the need for an integrated, holistic approach. Thank you. Over to you, Taiwa.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's a very succinct and focused presentation. So I will now like to introduce our next speaker, who is Marietta Hondro. Marietta Harjono, sorry, beg your pardon, Marietta. Marietta is the coordinating specialist for the Netherlands Human Environment and Transport Inspectorate in the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. She's been there since 2019, and she led the project on reviewing the quality of used vehicles exported to African countries. Prior to joining the ILT, she worked as a freelance researcher and a project leader on environmental topics. She has co-authored several reports and articles. She holds a master's degree in human geography from the University of Amsterdam and a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the Rollicate Deventer in the Netherlands. Marietta, you're welcome, and over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Tavia. Let me first try to share the screen.
Let me cancel my sharing. Okay.
Do you see it?
Not yet. Have you pressed share? When you
One
get share
second.
screen, pick it up
Yeah.
and just press share.
Yeah, it worked when we prepared it, but let me check again. One second, it doesn't show it at this moment. Give me 1 second, sorry.
Okay, again, well, Marietta is doing just a couple of questions. We would like to focus all the questions that you have in, we have two options, a Q&A and a chat. But I want to focus on all of them in one place so that we can monitor them and we can use them as part of the discussion. So we request that everybody puts questions, comments into the chat function rather than the question and Q&A section so that we can keep tabs on that. Then a couple of questions which I can answer now. Someone is asking about presentations. We will be sharing the presentations in English and French and the webinar recording after the event. So you will all get that. Based on your registration details, you'll get that information. Marietta, are you okay? Marietta, if you want, we could, okay. Yeah, now we can see.
Sorry, sorry for this. We are here now. Huh? Can you see it? Can you confirm that you can hear me and see the
We can see your screen, we can hear you. Thank you, Maria.
Excellent. Okay. Good day, everyone. Bonjour. I'm very pleased to be able to share the findings of the study we did last year. Just to quickly present myself, but Tavia already presented me. I'm working for the Human Environment and Transport Inspectorate. We are part of the Environment Ministry, or the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management from the Netherlands. But we have an independent role and we take care of all kinds of transport topics and environmental topics. As I said, I'm very pleased to be able to share the findings of our study today. I will share the link of the study we did after I stopped presenting, because I believe the topic has huge impacts, but also a lot of opportunities for health, road safety, and climate. So this is the cover of the report that we published last October 2020. So I would like to say a few things on the findings of our study, and I would like to share some thoughts with you about the way forward, what could be done. And I'm very curious to hear your ideas of what you think actually should be the best way forward. So maybe first let me quickly explain why the Inspectorate undertook this study. I think one of the main reasons is that we already in 2018 did a research on the fuels, the on-road fuels that were blended in the Netherlands and that were destined for West African countries. And since fuels and the quality of fuels and the qualities of vehicles together determine the level of pollutants, emissions to the air, we thought it would be important to also look at the quality of vehicles that the Netherlands exports to African countries. But the second reason is that we as an inspectorate organization, we come to the ports and we look at the vehicles, the second-hand vehicles exported to African countries. Since we are enforcers of the law, we do not allow end-of-life vehicles, scrap vehicles, to be exported to non-OECD countries unless they are depolluted or decontaminated. So while we come to the ports, we are not blind for the trends around us. And we see, as Jane spoke about, we see that increasingly governments around the world are taking measures and adapt policies to increase the quality of their vehicle fleet when it comes to road safety and when it comes to emissions. And one of the examples is the 15 countries of ECOWAS. So the study that we did actually consisted of two parts. We did a desk study, and we were able to match the data from customs, the export data, and the data from the Dutch National Vehicle Register. And whenever you are able to match this data through the VIN, the vehicle identification number, you are able to know a lot about the vehicles that are leaving the country. And as well, we did a 3-day field inspection together with the experts of the Netherlands Vehicle Authority. When we look at the desk study, and you will find a lot of the images in our report, but I will show you just a few. These are results from our desk study, and we looked at the top 12 export destinations from vehicles leaving the Netherlands. So as you can read, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Ethiopia, Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Libya, Mali, Morocco, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. And if you look at the quality of the vehicles, we see that the quality is low. Most of the vehicles are quite old. For example, if you look at Libya or to Nigeria, you see that a quarter of the vehicles going from the Netherlands to those two countries, they have an age of 19.6 years and up. At the same time, you see that if countries have policies in place, for example, here Ghana and Morocco, you see that the average age of the vehicles going to these countries are much lower. For example, 4.7 years for Morocco. When we look at the emission classes, Jane spoke about it, we see that the majority of the vehicles going to the West African countries and to the North African countries, most of the times, they have a low emission class. So in Euro emission 3, 2, 0 even, and just a few with Euro emission class 4 or up, and they go to Morocco and to Ghana again. If you look at the roadworthiness certificates, we saw that most of the vehicles exported from the Netherlands no longer have a valid roadworthiness certificate. When you look at mileage, you see that the vehicles, the light duty vehicles, usually have a mileage of around 200, 250 kilometers. If you look at the heavy duty vehicles, many times they have higher mileages of 250 to 300,000 kilometers on the odometer. What we also did is comparing the vehicles, the second-hand vehicles going to West African countries to vehicles that are ending up at the scrap yards, at the recycling yards in the Netherlands. And we see quite some similarities when it comes to the age of vehicles. The average age of a vehicle going to the scrapyard in the Netherlands is around 18 years old. We see that the majority have Euro 2 or Euro 3 class. And if we look at the mileage of the vehicles, they are quite similar with the vehicles going to West African countries, even having a little bit higher mileage on the odometer. We also decided to do a field inspection. And although we were able to test 160 vehicles, it was quite clear that they confirmed the findings of our desk study, but as well, we did find some new, we had some new findings as well. Because of course, a desk study is never able to actually test the emissions of the vehicles, which we were able to do when we were in the port. You can see some of the pictures showing it. Maybe just a few words on what we found. If we talk about the overall technical state of the vehicles, we saw that a group of vehicles being exported are in reasonable state. We saw that from our sample group that at least 56% of the petrol vehicles and 48% of the diesel vehicles would fail a periodic roadworthiness test. They have one or more deficiency. But I think it's important to to say, because we saw that also some of these vehicles still had valid roadworthiness certificate. And I think it's important to say we have this whole system in place in European countries on periodic roadworthiness tests. But I think it's important to say that they will tell you the condition and the fitness of the vehicle at that particular moment in time. It does not give a guarantee, of course, how what the condition of the vehicle is after 3 months or after 6 months or even after a week. And what we tend to see is that especially vehicles that are quite old in the Netherlands, that are need to have more repairs, have maybe deficiency, they tend to be ending up at the export market. We also saw that 1 out of the 8 airbags had a malfunction. Again, maybe we were looking at some of the mileages, and we saw some quite high mileages of especially the heavy duty vehicles. Here you see 2 examples of trucks. One was going to Lagos. It had almost 900,000 kilometers on the odometer, and this is another example for a German truck going to Benghazi, Libya. It also had like over 800,000 kilometers on the odometer. We also tested the emissions. We only tested a few diesel vehicles because most of the diesel vehicles that were queuing for export to African countries did not have a diesel particulate filter, but the younger ones we were able to test. We only tested 5, but it was worrying that only 1 of those 5 diesel particulate filters actually functioned. If you see the trend that especially European cities increasingly ban diesel vehicles, we have a concern that especially that there is a risk of highly emitting diesel vehicles entering the export market in the coming years. We also tested the emissions of the petrol cars. We used the exhaust gas analyzer, and we saw that 4 out of 5 complied, but that 1 out of 5 did not comply, at least 1 out of 5. And one of the problems we saw is that, and hopefully you can see it in the pictures, these are all from German petrol cars that were exported through the Netherlands to West and North Africa. And you can see here maybe that the catalytic converter had been removed and they had been replaced by pipes. The 2 pictures on the top, you can see the replacement of the catalytic converter. There was a group of vehicles in the port that we were unable to control. Many times actually, they had empty batteries because they were there already for a while. Sometimes they were completely worn out or too dirty to enter. Sometimes the doors couldn't open. Sometimes they were stuck on each other or they were sandwiched, so we couldn't get them out of the queue to be able to do an emission test. And although it was not the intention of our study at that moment, we did stop some vehicles as waste because they were in a bad state. I'll quickly go through a few examples. This is a Volkswagen from 1988 going to Nigeria. This was a truck from Poland from 2000 going to Nigeria. We saw that the pin was unreadable, the lights and the battery had been removed, the exhaust system was incomplete, the fuel tank was missing. There were a lot of deficiencies in this truck. The good news is that if we and you can find this table in our report, if we compared the quality of the vehicles going to the specific countries with the import regulation of the countries, we did see that regulation works. As I already said, we see that the younger vehicles, they go to Morocco, they go to Ghana. I have to say Côte d'Ivoire has also put new regulation in place, but our data of our desk study mostly covered the data from 2017 and 2018. So just before Côte d'Ivoire had this new regulation in place. So the good news is regulation works, but it's not complete. So I do agree with Jane, enforcement is very important. And we see also as well, I think we also need to be aware of loopholes. Just to give you one example, we see that there's a vehicle carrier liner who brings vehicles, like for example, they're loading.
You have
yes.
5 minutes left, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I will be finalizing soon. And we see that vehicles going to Libya, while the national government of Accord has said we do not want vehicles older than 10 years. We see that all the vehicles going to Libya, they have an age of 18 or more, 19, 20, over 20 years old. And it could be, but we're not sure, but that Libya is a gateway for used vehicles going into the African continent. And it could be a threat to effective implementation of ECOWAS new regulation, perhaps. So as Jane said, I think we agree that the implementation can not only depend on the policies or enforcement of the importing country, it's a joint responsibility between the exporting and importing countries. So we were happy to see that there is this program in place towards hopefully a harmonization of standards from export and importing countries. I think very quickly the benefits of a fleet consisting of vehicles in good technical states are, well, clearly I think more road safety. Mustafa already mentioned the disproportionate, the rate of the high fatality rate in African countries. If we talk about working emission control systems in vehicles, it will really increase cleaner air. Well-maintained and younger vehicles will consume less fuel. They will be cheaper to drive and they will have less climate emissions. So we do believe that periodic vehicle inspection procedures will need focusing on both the technical state as emissions. So I would like to finalize my presentation to just share some views with you, and I hope to hear during the discussion if you agree or if you have other views on this. We believe that harmonization of fuel and vehicle standards throughout the continent will be very important, as this will greatly enhance implementation at export and import. Promote implementation, it will be important so that used vehicles arrive as required. Inspection and maintenance programs definitely will be important so that vehicles will remain in the condition as arrived. And last but not least, I believe that when those vehicles come at the end of their lifetime, it will be important that there are safe recycling networks so that they are safely disposed of with a high recycling rate. Very quickly, why is harmonization of standards important? I think for the very simple reason is that vehicles can easily cross borders. We already spoke about the loopholes, maybe Libya, but also through other countries. So if you have harmonized standards, it will definitely enhance implementation and facilitate enforcement. I think it would be good to invest in capacity building, training of inspectors, so that we are aware of tricks. Just to give you an example, just 1 month ago, we found vehicles put in a container to be shipped to Africa. Probably it was meant to avoid import taxes, but we believe that these vehicles were meant to be continue driving on the African roads. But in this status, it's impossible to check the engine, to check the brakes, etc. It will be important to get proper access to vehicle data for the countries. And maybe the good news is in Europe, we have Eucaris, which is a platform where European countries can share data on vehicles. But the General Assembly decided in October 2020 that also non-Eucaris members should be able to enter this platform. So, and they are building the portal now. So in the future, the national vehicle authorities from African countries should also be able to get information out of this system. And I think very important, it's important that we should check the removal or the functioning of emission devices. I think I'm on my time. I had a last slide, but yeah, I think it's time now, so I'll stop sharing. If you have any comments or questions that we are not able to discuss within this webinar, please feel free to contact me or send your questions, and we are happy to get back to you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Marietta. So I think what we'll do is we'll bring up the discussants, and then we'll come back, and then we'll use what the discussants say and the questions which have come up to bring that to the presenters. So can I ask all the discussants to unblock their videos now and come up on screen? I'll just share screenshot of who these discussants are. Unfortunately, Mr. Boulajour has been called out by the ministry, so he's unable to join us today. So the three people on the panel as at now are Divine Indikong, who is the Director of Road Transport at the Ministry of Transport in Cameroon, Monsieur Boubacar Biaye, who is a Member of Parliament of the National Assembly of Senegal, but is also a member of the Africa chapter of parliamentarians who support the road safety agenda. And then we also have Roger Gorham, who is a senior transport economist at the World Bank, who has been working more broadly with UNEP and also internally on the bank on a report on motorization management and ways that we can help the continent to improve these issues. So welcome to the panel. I will start first by asking Divine a question. Divine, Cameroon has recently undertaken an assessment of its vehicle inspection system. I know you're working with the International Vehicle Inspection Agency, CETA. In the light of the reports that, the findings that both Jane and Marietta have spoken about, can you give us a little bit of a background of what the key findings of this report was and how this ties into ways that you are going to improve your vehicle inspection systems and vehicle importation systems in the country?
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone. Pleased to have the opportunity to share Cameroon's the content of the study in Cameroon. The report was made public, and you have the report already. It is important to first of all situate the fact that this studies was carried out in Cameroon, which I personally coordinated the study. It was carried out in Cameroon upon Cameroon's request in October 2019. And the recommendation of these studies enable Cameroon to carry out what today we refer to as the reform of the vehicle inspection system in Cameroon. So one of the first things the report had to try to do a resume about 11 aspects that the report had to present. The first thing was the fact that the report mentioned that by when the report was being done, that there was no guarantee that a vehicle can be present, physically present at the roadworthiness center for the test to be done. So what I'm going to do is maybe I'll present the diagnosis of the report, and at the same time mention what we have done as per that diagnosis to address the issue. So the report fairly stated that in Cameroon at that time, a vehicle someone can send his vehicle registration certificate to the center and to a center, and they issue a roadworthiness certificate without the vehicle physically present at the center. So with the reform that took place and as from February 2020, based on this report, a new system was put in place where a vehicle has to be geolocalized in a center. The entire procedure was computerized. Your vehicle has to be present at the roadworthiness center, present at the control panel, and the computerized parameters are picked up. That sends the information, the image of your vehicle directly to the Ministry of Transport to before the system is authorized automatically to start the control procedure. And the information that is picked from every control unit is sent into an independent system that analyzes the information automatically, making it impossible for the controllers to modify the information that the control leaches out. And the image of that vehicle appears on the report of the roadworthiness control report. This system has enabled us to guarantee the physical presence of vehicle at the center. And upon the implementation of this system, when the system was implemented, 6 months evaluation done, we discovered that we have had 118% increase of number of vehicles that have been going to the roadworthiness center. The second aspect that the report pointed out, which was true, was the fact that the reports, the stickers, the windscreen stickers, which is used to authentify the fact that a vehicle has gone to the center, was not secured. What usually happens is that people print those documents on the streets and they paste them on their vehicles. There's no method to verify if it's authentic. Some roadworthiness centers produce the document without securing that document. They use the fake ones, paste them on vehicles. We have so many vehicles in circulation without with the windscreen roadworthiness certificate based on the windscreen, whereas it's not from any roadworthiness center or bought on the street. So that's why with the reform that was done 2020, the roadworthiness windscreen license has been changed. It has been first of all, to get that reform done, the Ministry of Transport had to publish an international call for tender for a company that can secure the entire process for the issuance of roadworthiness certificate. And a French company was recruited, proved that, and that it has a reputation of securing documents and even secure the spare part of the Boeing airplane. So we have this system that produces the roadworthiness windscreen license that cannot be reproduced, cannot be faked by users. And there is a mobile application that the Ministry of Transport gave to the National Police Force after training them, and gave to the National Gendarmerie, that enables them to read that roadworthiness certificate on the windscreen and know if it's authentic, and actually provide instantly the image of that vehicle, why it was at the roadworthiness center, and the total every information about the vehicle's state at the time it was controlled at the roadworthiness center. This system of control was because we discovered that urban taxi drivers, what they do is that they borrow tires. They go and borrow good tires, and they go and do the roadworthiness center, or they go and put they have body parts that are not okay. They'll borrow good ones and they put fit on their vehicles, and they go and do the roadworthiness control. And when they pass, they come back, they remove what they borrow and give it back to the owner. So that's why the system had to put in place a control that enables the police officers to see the image of the vehicle at the time it was at the roadworthiness center, to compare with the image of the vehicle that is in front of the control officer. That's a system of control that was put in place. That's very efficient. That corroborates with sanction. The ministry recently sanctioned about 5 transportation companies that were found with fake roadworthiness certificates, and their operational licenses were suspended, and the judicial police investigation was open to find out from where those fake presented the weakness in the system of homologating new vehicles that comes into Cameroon. Because of the report, we had to check the technical potentials of the structure, the company that was recruited to homologate, carry out inspection for new vehicles that have to get to Cameroon, new prototypes, and owing to weaknesses that we found in the technical equipments of that structure, the ministry had to authorize new structures we knew after inspections with their equipments to start the homologation procedure in Cameroon. So now we have a new structure that's in charge of carrying out vehicle homologation before they are being used in Cameroon. That's what we've done since just after the CITA report. The fourth aspect that the report also presented was the fact that there was absence of sanction of roadworthiness centers that were complaisance, fraud. They were manipulating the figures. Sadly enough, we had an accident in Cameroon with a vehicle that went to a roadworthiness center, and the braking system was measured at 29%, and which means the vehicle failed. But because the system by then, 2019, was manual, the controller simply went into the system and added 5 in front of the 9, and it became 59. The vehicle left the center with a successful result, and few meters afterwards had an accident. A braking system failed, and then we had 31 people died in that accident. So, since after the CITA report presented such weaknesses, the reform that was put in place check the efficiency of the functioning of the equipments of all the roadworthiness centers, because the new system that's put in place is connected to all the equipments of the center, and enable us, when an equipment is not functional, the system indicates that equipment is bad, is not functional, or has not been calibrated, is not giving the right figures. The system automatically suspends that center from functioning, and disable the center from receiving.
Yeah. Can you wind up, because we have quite a lot to cover and others. So if you could just wind up in the next minute or so, and we'll give you a chance to come back when we're
okay. So a level of sanctions, we moved from 40 centers to 23 centers that were sanctioned. So the bottom line is the CITA report actually presented a roadworthiness system in Cameroon that was not efficient, and that was manual, and the equipments were in most of the centers were not functional. And now with the reform enabled us to secure, interconnect all the centers to a national database that enabled the Ministry of Transport to see every operation that's being carried out in every roadworthiness center, and make sure that you cannot influence the content of information that the system produces. And once a center has an equipment that's not functioning, the system automatically blocks the center. So today we can conveniently say that we have had a 180% increase in number of vehicles that go to the roadworthiness center, and a mobile application that enables us to control all vehicles that have gone to the center or not. We are moving towards a system of having national norm and standards for vehicles that are going to be imported in Cameroon, and have put in place a center that trains controllers in these roadworthiness centers, because before then, controllers actually have no training. But today we have a center that trains them, and ministry actually give them authorization. So in the nutshell, that's the diagnosis that we've done by CITA and the measures that the Ministry of Transport have taken to ameliorate and reform the entire roadworthiness system in Cameroon. Thank you very much, Tara.
Thank you, Divine. Thank you. So now I'll go on to Monsieur Bi. We brought you in specifically because we realize that the parliamentarians and the legislators play a very strong role in the kind of reforms in terms of laws, and also in terms of advocacy for the community to do with safety. So what I'd like from you is, as a legislator and a parliamentarian from Senegal, what do you think can be done from the legal and advocacy perspective to ensure that your country improves the standards of vehicle safety, both from the importation perspective, but also the inspection perspective of what is being done in the country? Mr. Biai, vous avez la parole. Monsieur, you're muted. Can you please unmute your microphone?
Donc, je vous remercie effectivement.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to meet with the your group. And let me respond directly to your question, if I may. So as I understand it, you want to know what we can do as a parliament to ensure road safety. Well, I am optimistic for Senegal, and this is for a number of reasons. First, the behavior of the government. Second, the will of the people to seriously reduce the results of accidents, car accidents, and also the decision taken by the President of the Republic So let me just, as a reminder, say that in 2012, Senegal banned import for vehicles over 5 years old. And the president, when he was inaugurated, put this in as a decree, and that changed in particular Article 3 of the decree. And that put the 5-year limits to 8 years. Now, that's understandable because it was a campaign promise. But the consequence of that degree of going from 5 to 8 years as the age of the vehicle is that a lot of things exploded and imports exploded, but also deaths and accidents. For 2012, 40% of the imported vehicles from 26,000 through customs compared to 14,000 in 2013. And we went to almost 21,000 compared to the 26,000 that I said earlier. These are figures are rounded off, says the interpreter. And then until 2015, it was an amazing increase in these older vehicles that were being imported. At the same time, as far as deaths were concerned, the Ministry of Transport in June of 2020 said that there were, and the interpreter apologizes, but the sound is not very good. We're going to do the best that we can. But in 2013, we had 4,000 deaths. And the 2016 report said that there were 403 deaths of 5,000 some injured. And of these, there were 500 were public transport, 212 were heavy weight vehicles. Now, when we had to make a choice, Senegal decided that we wanted to protect citizens from death. And so a number of measures were taken in 2019, and the decree that had authorized importing vehicles that were up to 8 years was canceled. And from 2019, we went back to the older standard of having it be 5-year limit. Back to 5 years. So that has definitely changed the situation. And then the state also launched a discussion on driver's licenses, because many of these deaths showed a number of tendencies, namely that drivers often were at fault in 55% of the death toll. Pedestrians also cause 15%. And the non-respect of laws also cause further deaths. And the fact that there were defects in the rolling stock imported was responsible for 3% of the deaths. So given these figures, the country has decided to either take a law or a decree, but these days we are optimistic that we can go in the direction of a law which would allow Senegal to get to 0 accidents. Because when it comes to quality, the roads are built to international standards. And the roads, if you've come to Senegal, if you want to compare the new roads in Senegal, you're going to note serious improvements. And the roadworthiness tests that we have, all cars are now subject to a roadworthiness test if they are over 5 years old, they are tested additionally. And if it does not pass the inspection, then it does not drive in the country. And these measures, we believe, show that the state is prepared to do whatever it takes to work towards good results when it comes to road safety. So that is a very pragmatic and synthetic view of what we have done. And we are certainly very optimistic, as I said, that we will get to the results that the World Bank is expecting of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Biai. Okay, then the final discussant will be Roger Gorham, who is a senior transport specialist at the bank. Roger, you can bring the global perspective. You've heard some of the feedback from our colleagues. What can the bank and the international community to do to support and guide this shift in Africa to looking more closely at the issues around vehicles? And how can this motorization management policy be used to address the safety issue? If you could keep your responses short, we can get an opportunity for some of the participants to ask questions afterwards and respond to some of the questions which have come into the chat. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Talia, and hello, everybody. Thanks to Jane and Marietta for the really fascinating presentations and these reports, which have really shed a lot of light and I think opened up a lot of eyes. As I was listening to Marietta's report, I was thinking that I think a lot of the people from listening to this from Africa might be surprised at putting some numbers to this, but the actual facts probably aren't new. That this is a day-to-day reality that I think people are living with. I'd like to step back and kind of say, what is all of this kind of telling us about, what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa, but not just sub-Saharan Africa. I think that many of the things that we're observing in sub-Saharan Africa can be said that this is something that happens in many in many countries around the world, particularly where there is no motor vehicle manufacturing industry based in those countries. And that is, I think, three things. Number one, there's some weaknesses in policy formulation, and really related to kind of an, I won't say an ad hoc approach to policy formulation, but a need for a more structured way of creating policy, weaknesses in institutions, and then weaknesses in the analysis, both once the policies and institutions are in place, but also in thinking in advance about the policies and institutions. For example, understanding how vehicle markets are functioning and what the impact of doing different kinds of things will have in different parts of the vehicle market. As it's been mentioned, we are working on a report on what we call motorization management, and it's actually a fancy term for just trying to take a lot of these ideas and put them into a comprehensive set of packages and comprehensive package and set of ways of looking at the issue for countries. Very briefly, motorization management is really trying to look at policy. So it's trying to look at policy that affects motor vehicles from all of the different impacts that motor vehicles can have throughout their life cycle. So that includes looking at the cleanliness of the vehicles, how much do they pollute. That includes looking at how fuel intensive they are. It includes looking at how safe they are. It includes looking at their entry into service, how they're managed while they're active, how do they scale down and leave the fleet, and then it looks at overall demand management and how that affects demand for vehicles. It also is looking at institutions. So we're looking at how is the motor vehicle stock governed by in an effective governance framework. And so we have identified, I'm not going to get into it here, there's not time, but we've identified 10 programs that we think really need to be the focus of the management of the vehicle throughout its life cycle. Some of that does include certification or homologation of new vehicles coming in. Some of it involves periodic technical inspections and on-road enforcement, as has been discussed during the seminar, but there's a whole bunch of other kind of programs that are really linked to this. And then the last is policy analysis. There's a need for continuous analysis of policies. We are suggesting that just as we have road safety observatories, just as we have corridor integration and management observatories, we need motorization management observatories, preferably at the regional level, as has been suggested by Marietta and others, because these policies should be integrated regionally, but there should be dedicated organizations that are really looking at policy and making this analysis constant. So just to answer your other question, Jane, about sort of how can the international community support this? Really, I think there's two big areas. One is in helping to strengthen the international used vehicle trade frameworks. This is something that UNEP has really been doing a great job of putting this out there, working with partners within the UN system. That has to do with setting the rules that everybody's going to live by in terms of managing secondhand vehicle trade, but also enhancing trade accountability, being able to track the movement of vehicles so that the next time UNEP won't have to painstakingly go through one by one, country by country to tweak out this data. There should be systems that can track it. It's been mentioned by Marietta and others, the need to share and manage data when the vehicles come into developing countries, that they can be able to actually have access to the databases that govern those vehicles before. aligning standards on a regional basis as mentioned. And Marietta mentioned ELV, but part of that really is the protocols for materials recovery. So in the global north, there are increasingly stringent requirements on manufacturers to be able to use the materials again. But we need to have a system in place that can allow that to happen as vehicles are traded. And then the other way that I think the international community can support is with financial resources and technical assistance. So technical assistance for the diagnostic studies that need to happen to put the policies in place, technical assistance for these observatories that I had mentioned, technical assistance for policy formulation and supporting that process, again, ideally at the regional level. And then I think there's a lot of opportunity for the MDBs to do policy lending and investment lending. I won't go into too much detail there, but the investment lending is on both the nuts and bolts needs that countries may have to get their institutions set up once those diagnostic studies are done. And there's also some investment lending that can be made as policies are developed to try to influence vehicle markets and push consumers into buying certain kinds of vehicles. That there are ways that that those pushes can be supported through lending and financial resources. So we'll, as I mentioned, we have some more reports coming out later in the year, not even later in the year, in a few months' time. I'm sure these will be publicized on the SSATP website. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Roger. So I think what we want to do, we have about 30 minutes left. Well, 25 so that we can wind up. I want to sort of bring the participants and the audience in answering some questions. I think between myself and Kaori, we're monitoring some of the questions which have come up in chat, and we will address them to the participants, to the presenters and to the discussants. Kaori, can you pick up on the first questions, and I'll come in on the additional questions.
Hi, yes. So there were many questions. It was a very active chat box, but there were some questions. There was a comment from someone with regards to Cameroon and taxes on imported vehicles being very high. This pushes individuals to buy older and less efficient cars, given that they will be faced with a very high tax bill. Banning old cars will thus not work in Cameroon. How should one proceed in this, given this information? Lowering taxes is a difficult sell. On a related note, Desiderio, on the flip side, said that one of the reasons why Africa imports old secondhand vehicles is due to the attractive sale value of the secondhand vehicles versus the prohibited financial interest rates if you opt to get financing. How have the financing aspects for vehicle purchases in Africa been tackled, given the fact that generally in Africa, any financing to the private sector has a very high interest rate? So it's regarding financing and import taxes. That's one question. I leave it open to any panelists that may want to address that question, but I'll go ahead and pose a second question. And it's regards to let's see, can speakers throw some light on the import of the two-wheeler situation? Is it better, equal, or worse?
Maybe you could get a third question and we can get responses, and then we'll ask another group of questions. So which of the panelists, I think the one on Cameroon, maybe Divine, if you could answer that briefly, and then we can ask which other panelist wants to come in on the others. And Divine, if you could really keep your response short so that we can get as many questions in as possible. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think it is the process of importing vehicles in Cameroon, there's a lot of middlemen that are involved. And most of the importers rely more on middlemen than addressing the custom service directly. So that's why the middlemen charges and all that gives the impression that the cost is higher. It is true that the Cameroon policy is the newer the vehicle, the lesser the taxes, and the older the vehicle, the more the vehicle is being taxed to discourage older vehicles from coming to Cameroon. As the policies concerning two-wheelers, Cameroon is actually taxing more the importation of two-wheelers because it's really a problem of managing it in Cameroon, and actually refusing right now to authorize even three-wheelers to be used for commercial purpose because we're having a lot of problems managing the bike riders sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Divine. Any of the other panelists? Jane, want to come in on the other question? And then we will continue. And then a few people in the chat have also requested to ask questions. Jane, please. Thank you.
Yes, maybe if I may mention that when it comes to taxation for vehicles, I think it's not just an issue of, newer vehicles versus used vehicles, because the objective is to target cleaner, more efficient vehicles. So what we've done is that we've worked with several countries, I think roughly 20 countries in Africa, to look at the kind of vehicles they're importing, how efficient, what's the technology, because you want to be able to target cleaner and more efficient vehicles so that, you're not just saying, you'll charge a newer Hammer, less because it's newer than a more smaller, efficient vehicle. So I think that the way government taxes will need to be geared towards consumption, fuel efficiency, and technology, and there are ways to do that. Then the other question of the two-wheelers that has also been asked, what we see is that the two-wheelers actually are imported new. So the three-wheelers are imported new, but the quality is not good. They're highly pollutive. And in a lot of the studies that we've done is that we've seen that they are more, on a kilometer, they're more pollutive than even a bus. So a lot of it, you need to look at how do we incentivize, especially now the world is moving. India, China, they're moving to electric three-wheelers. So how do we incentivize this? They are easier to charge. They're easier, they create job opportunities for assembly, but also, definitely they need to link to, proper public transport. I know in Kenya, they're looking at the three-wheelers as first mile, last mile connectivity, because, the failed public transport, government is looking at public transport, and then from the bus stop to the house, they can be used for such short distances. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So to go back to the questions, Aurelio also asked a question earlier. Aurelio is one of the practice managers in the World Bank, and he says, has an assessment of the markets and who buys second-hand vehicles and been done, and what would be the implications for the required stricter rules and regulations? Because with this kind of political economy analysis, it will be important to better understand what the incentive framework is for importing vehicles and the potential impact on the distributors and the purchasers, people like taxi drivers and small trucking operators and so on. So could one of you answer that question, please?
Yes, maybe I could answer that and say that there hasn't been a study as such, but looking at the vehicles, the various studies that we've done with the countries, in the countries, about 20, with the governments and the universities, what we've seen is that a lot of these vehicles are being imported by the middle class. So the low income that I think the question was looking at, most of those people are importing actually the 2-3-wheelers with the hope of graduating to to these vehicles, once they get some income. So it's a middle income. And I know for some years back, there was a study that was done for Kenya that looked at, before they put the 80 age limit, they looked at what are the costs, because I've seen also one of the questions is it's expensive. It's also big business when it comes to not just the vehicles, the spare parts and all that. But I know there was a study that was done in Kenya, and they saw that they're actually also using a lot of millions of dollars to import spare parts. And some of these spare parts are getting secondhand because the vehicles are very old. So it is something that, is costing countries. I think it's when you look at the net impact of it, it's costing countries if you do not legislate the kind of vehicles that is coming in. And I think that's why one of the discussions I've been seeing for East Africa, they're looking at how do they legislate and, move towards more stricter, they're looking more for the age limit, and also, eventually restricting used vehicles, but also to be able to build up manufacturing, sort of like industrial capacity. But when looking at the whole life cycle, the cost, the benefit, I think, legislating vehicles is important because of the costs, spare parts, the time wasted when looking for, the mechanics. There were other issues I saw in the discussion on we need to train the mechanics on emissions. A vehicle, you cannot retrofit. It's very expensive to retrofit, for example, the technology that we are talking about, and the vehicle will not operate optimally. So it is cost effective to buy at the outfront and a low emission car.
Talia, can I come in?
Sure, Roger.
Yeah, related also to the question, I just want to reiterate, I think that doing this kind of market analysis is critical, but it really needs to be continual. It needs to be done on a constant basis. To pick up on Jane's last point, the policy formulation should really be done as it is in countries that have a motor vehicle manufacturing industry with an eye toward 10, 15 years. So that it becomes very clear in 10 years, how are these standards going to be ratcheted up and change? So we call that a sort of a dynamic profile of standards. But in order to be able to understand that dynamic profile of standards and be able to change it as need be, there needs to be a constant assessment of the market as the policies are being formulated, but also as they're being implemented. I think that's a big difference between what you see in sub-Saharan Africa and countries that don't have a manufacturing industry and those that do, is this process of constant understanding of the market and how the market is changing. So I think that's a key thing that we need to try to change and influence.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, so we actually, we actually extended the time for another 30 minutes to the top of the hour, but that still leaves a lot of questions to be answered. So we need to move forward a little faster. I just want to call on Mustafa, the program manager of SSATP. He had a question to pose to the panelists, and then we'll come back to the questions in the chat function. Mustafa, please.
Thank you, Taiwa, and thank you to Jane, to Marietta for their excellent presentations. I have a question to Jane and another question to Marietta. I think Jane, in your presentation, you mentioned that the challenge is harder to regulate at import points. It's harder to regulate at export point than at import points. And the example you gave is the progress that ECOWAS countries has made recently. My question, if you can just talk a little bit, why that is the situation? Why is it harder to regulate at export point than at entry point? Is there any discussion platform to enter into discussions, to bring the exporters and the importers together around the same table and discuss. That's my question. And to Marietta, I mean, the initiative taken by your directorate is really great. Is the same thing done by other countries? Do you know of, let's say, other European countries that are doing such analysis, such inspections, diagnosis? And as far as Netherlands is concerned, based on the findings of your report, has Netherlands taken some concrete steps or regulations to limit, I would say, the damage, to regulate this export of unworthy vehicle to Africa? These are the two questions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Jane first, and then Marietta, and I think this ties into answers some of the questions in the panel as well. So we'll look and answer the questions will bring up the questions which haven't been answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. What I can say is that we've been trying to bring in the exporters to the table through the UN Road Safety Fund activities and working with the UNECE to discuss the minimum standards that we were talking about. What are the minimum standards or requirement for a vehicle to be exported? But what I can say is that currently we only have the EU that is willing and that has come to the table. Some of the other exporting countries are not very I can say they're not very willing, but we're still working with them. And that's why for me, it's quite important because of the experience that we had, even when we were working with countries on the, let's say, elimination of lead in petrol. So long as an importing country does not have the standard, we found that the exporters, which were, in this case, maybe, the refineries, were not willing because there was a market that they were just gearing for. So it is very important for, let's say, African countries to come up with standards because that ensures that the kind of product they're receiving is good as we work with the exporting countries. I think for the exporting countries, it's also big business for them. For example, from what we've been made to understand is that in Japan, a vehicle that is, let's say, after 7 years will not be able to meet the national requirements when it comes to emissions. So a vehicle owner can turn in the vehicle for about $2,000. But the same vehicle, they can be able to export it for $5,000, $7,000. So there isn't a lot of incentives there is incentive for the exporter to actually be able to, ship the vehicle, and they're able to get more money. Hence the importance for importers to come up with standards and regulations. Thank you.
Yes, Mustafa, thanks a lot for your question. And I think it's a good question on are the Netherlands the only country in Europe who do these kind of studies? Well, so far, I think we were the first actually to look specifically at this topic. I have not heard yet any plans from other European countries to do their own analysis. But what I can say though is that while we focused on the vehicles leaving the Netherlands, we are one of the smaller exporting countries in the European Union. We believe what we saw is indicative for what the European countries, the EU as a whole, is exporting to the African countries. I think so if you look at the policy side, I think your question is correct. It's like, what is the Netherlands doing? I think the good news is that our Minister of Environment, she when we brought this topic to her attention, she's very concerned and very enthusiastic to take this topic further. So what we were able to do is to bring it to the attention to the European Commission. And what the good news is that the European Commission at the moment is evaluating and revising relevant legislation, for example, the EU waste shipment regulation and the end-of-life vehicles. And what we have asked as a country is to actually consider this topic specifically and get it into the new regulation. Because at the moment, and this is something I see a lot of European countries are actually wrestling with the fact, like, can we stop a bad quality vehicle going to Africa? We have to prove it's a waste. And this is actually stopping us from being like very bold. And I hope actually that we can get a clarification during this legislative process, like when can we consider a vehicle and when can we consider it as a waste. But on top of it, because this can be like a philosophic discussion for for years, which we don't have. At the same time, in the Netherlands, we decided to explore the legal means whether we can actually make new legislation that only so that we can only export vehicles to non-EU countries if they have had a roadworthiness certificate test done very recently. And so we are exploring this. This is something our minister has as well promised to our parliament to check whether we can do something already before waiting for European countries to act upon. And we see that some of what we believe is very important, that so we are not concerned of taking our own measures, but it's very important to say, like, we have the ports of Hamburg, we have the ports of Antwerp, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Le Havre. It's easy if we as only country will put stricter limits, the vehicles will go and leave from Antwerp. And we see that the Belgian colleagues, they take a similar approach. So we had a meeting with some of the top 5 countries, let's say the biggest exporting countries, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and Belgium. And we saw that more European countries are interested to see whether we can have a policy in place where we only allow vehicles to be shipped to, for example, Africa, if they have been considered roadworthy. And I think that would be the ideal situation. And I think when we talk about import standards and export standards, maybe an ideal situation. And I saw some questions from the panelists, from the people in the audience, like whether age should be so important or whether maybe something else should be important. It's not only age, I think it's important because maintenance is important. So at least what I think, at least the exporting countries should make sure that they only send good quality vehicles. So, and I think we all agree that we don't want to stop the exports, but it should be of a good quality. And age, of course, will help to set age limits from the importing sites, because if you already start with a vehicle which is 15 or 20 years old, it will only start its life in Africa, and it will be emitting pollutants for like another maybe 10 or 20 years. So, but we need to find, a good way of putting the standards, and it's. But at least I think from our perspective, from the Netherlands, it would be important that at least the exporting countries make sure that they only send the vehicles that are considered roadworthiness, and that covers both technical state as well emissions. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mariette. And I think it answers quite a few of the other people's questions. There's a question from Peter on a similar aspect, whether how we can work with OECD countries on convincing them not to export unworthy cars. I think it also ties into a question from Michael, which is talking about the maintenance at country level, because he was asking a question that local mechanics also are not very familiar with vehicles, and so safety and emission controls can be compromised because of the quality of the capacity of the mechanics at country level. There's also a question on the role of sustainable urban mobility plans as an efficient way to introduce the demand for outdated vehicles. Challenge is we have probably, I would not say, we have 5 minutes to end. My thinking is one of the things we can do is, based on what we are getting here, is to probably plan another webinar which will focus on that sort of downstream part, on that maintenance and inspection, so we can spend a little bit more time on that. And so I would feel we should hold on to those questions now. And then I think that apart from that, maybe the question on the sustainable mobility, if any of you can answer it, on the sustainable urban mobility plans and any role that that can play in this regulation of vehicles. If one of you could answer that, I think we'll probably wind up after that. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to take a crack at that. I mean, I think that it's very critical that basically, you know, as you're thinking about policy that affects the motor vehicle markets, that policy can affect vehicles at entry. It can affect the vehicles while they're being used, and it can really affect how quickly the vehicles cycle out. And that's really a very critical question to air quality, really to all of these things, to safety and to CO2 emissions. So the question is, how do you get vehicles to cycle out from the vehicle fleet in an effective way? And really that is as much a question of your broader sustainable urban mobility policy or sustainable transport policies as it is anything related to the motor vehicle fleet itself. So where you have very strong systems of public transport, where you have very strong support for non-motorized transport, where you have very good active integration of transport and land use types of interventions, then it means that the policies that you might put in place to make, for example, motor vehicle use more expensive, I know that's a dirty word, but that they then are subject to, potentially they're subject to less opposition because you've given people options, you've given people alternatives. So all of these things really have to function as a system. So I think the real key thing here is to know that efforts to improve the quality of the vehicle fleet doesn't mean that this is a substitute for better all-around transportation policy and sustainable transportation policy. It's one key part of it, and they have to work together. I'll so as to not take up too much time, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, so I think that's addressed most of the questions. Unfortunately, because of time, we're not going to be able to go more deeply into the others. One of the things I wanted to do was a quick second poll on some of the future topics that we can bring up as part of our webinar series. So I'm just going to launch this poll and ask you if you could kindly quickly respond. These are some of the areas that we thought we might want to talk on in upcoming webinar topics. And then I will put a second question, which actually, if there's something which is missing, you just quickly type in what you think is a useful topic that we can discuss as a community. Thank you. Again, I'll give you about a minute, so then we can go. You can vote for as many topics as you want, and then we can go to the survey question. Okay, so I'll be rounding up in the next 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So to end and to share results, I think that there's a keen interest in what are good road safety interventions, and then what is the road safety culture as based on the assessment done by the ESRA team, something around speed management. So I think we can start addressing some of these issues, and thank you very much on that as well. There was a final question that I'd wanted to ask, which was supposed to be surveys, which for some reason I think it doesn't come up, so we'll do it. So we were supposed to have a closing remarks by the Transport Policy Officer of we're supposed to have closing remarks by the Transport Policy Officer of the African Union, but again, he has just sent a message that he's unable to join. So I think I will just want to say thank you very much first to the presenters and to the discussants, and then to all the participants who stayed on right throughout this this session. We will, as we'll give you feedback, each of you will get the copies of the presentation. We'll send copies both in French and English. If you notice that both panelists put their email addresses, and we will also share the email address of SSATP. If you have any additional questions that you want to ask and you want us to direct them, we can also do that. And so just thank you to Mustafa, Program Manager, for being there all throughout. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you very much to our interpreters. We always appreciate the work you do in getting the information to quality interpretation to our participants. We hope to see you again in our next, we will update the list of webinars, and we'll keep you in contact with you, and we hope to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you very much, and it's been very good having you. Thank you. Bye.
Tawia?
Yes.
Maybe afterwards, when you have a moment, we can have a bit of a debrief on follow-ups and things like that.
This is what I was thinking. So I'm just sort of waiting for them to depart, but I think I might help that as well.
Maybe if you want to take a little break, we can reconvene in a little bit.
Okay, so we can reconvene in it's 10 o'clock your time. What, 10, 15? Would that work for you?
Yeah, yeah. Through Zoom or through Teams?
I think we can just leave this on, and what do you think? And then we'll just
okay, perfect. If it doesn't disconnect, I'll be back in 15
it shouldn't
minutes.
disconnect.
10 minutes.
So okay, all right.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Okay, all right then. Bye.